Welcome, everybody. It's been a few weeks since we've recorded a new episode, but we have a very special guest today. I'm very excited for this conversation. Dr. Deepak Khazanchi. Did I get that? We were literally just talking about it off recording. I should have practiced before first, but
It was perfect. It was perfect.
you must be somewhat of a big deal because if you go to Perplexity AI, it's an AI product for searching the internet, and you just put your name in, it spits out a very well put together kind of synopsis of your life and career. So I'm just gonna not plagiarize, I guess, because I gave them credit. Let me know if this is accurate. Maybe it's not. So Dr. Deepak is a distinguished professor of information systems and technology at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. As the Mutual of Omaha Distinguished Chair of IS&T, he brings over 2 decades of academic leadership and research expertise to the field. Dr. Kazanchi's work spans cutting-edge areas such as applied machine learning, AI fairness, metaverse technologies, and virtual project management. A Fulbright scholar with multiple international collaborations, he's also deeply engaged with the business community, serving on several boards and conducting workshops on digital transformation. How to do? Is that all?
That's pretty good. That was a nice synopsis from my about page.
That's good. You search Devin Seacrest and you get, did you mean Ryan Seacrest? That's all I get. So
That's a tough act.
that's a tough act, Paul. Yeah.
You can use it though to get into clubs.
That's true.
There's
Great to have you on, Deepak. It's I know Tanner, our sales and marketing guy, has spoken extremely highly of you. And actually, I was going to ask, were you at the kickoff panel for the AI degree at UNO? There was like a kickoff event last Thursday.
No, I wasn't, but yes. So that's one of our college's Bachelor of Science in AI degree that's being launched. I mean, officially it will launch in fall of next year, but there was a soft launch just recently. I wasn't at that panel. I was at a conference in Seattle talking about LLMs and analytics and how what the bias exists in those things. So
I want to kind of dig into these things that Perplexity so nicely called out with you. AI fairness and virtual project management are extremely interesting kind of topics, especially to us here at CodeBuddy. But regarding the AI degree at UNO, I did kind of want to get your thoughts because this is something that, like, even our last episode, we had a developer on who's former educator. He was a school counselor for 9 or 10 years before he decided to quit his job and become a developer. And both my parents are education, and we talked about on that episode, like, honestly, I'm not sure what the future of educating folks on AI and software and technologies like this is, just because it is the fastest moving innovation, technologically speaking, I would argue, ever. And obviously there's certain things that have to happen at a 4-year university, but they did a really good job of kind of laying out the plan for how can we build an AI major that is agile and flexible and able to kind of roll with the advances that are coming out. But if you can speak to it, I'm curious as to your thoughts.
no, I think that is the challenge and the opportunity for higher ed, right? I think we have to try to cater to students' interests in an area where everyone's interested in. But I also think that since I just thinking about my own self, I'm not a computer scientist. I am actually what I would consider a cross between management, business, psychology, and computer science, right? So my areas kind of intersect in all of those places. So, I think the future of education is multidisciplinary, if not transdisciplinary, right? Across disciplines. So I think that a bachelor in AI, like the one we have gotten approved from the Board of Regents, attempts to set the basic foundations. So, the technical abilities that you need to understand AI, but also allows for flexibility in sense that you could take electives from philosophy or business or information sciences and information systems or ethics, and kind of build your interest in more of the governance side or the technical side or the managerial side of AI. So I think that agility is essential for an undergraduate degree today. I mean, and thinking about the future, I guess. So I think it's a smart way to go, and I think our computer science team here at the college have done an amazing job of creating a curriculum that hopefully allows that kind of flexibility and collaboration across campus, because ultimately those other areas would have to bring in philosophy and people from the arts and sciences and people from information systems, which is, we are part of the same college, but we are more business. Our view is more a business lens, and then of course the traditional computer science, and then cybersecurity. So all these areas are intersecting. I mean, you cannot avoid it.
Yeah,
So I
for
think
sure.
any educational degree has to have that ability, and also we want to attract different kinds of people. I mean, I guess I would say, we don't need to have only people who are strong in math doing computer science in the AI discipline. You need people who are also philosophers and thinkers about what are the, which is what I study, I guess, what are the unintended consequences of AI? What are the, flaws in the way we approach development in machine learning? So, which you kind of refer to, like the fairness idea. So that comes from ethics theory, not from any computer
Hmm.
science theory. So really, I think we need to have a more meta view of how AI affects us as individuals, as organizations, and as society. I think, in general. I mean, I think we cannot ignore it. I mean, yeah. No, maybe I'll stop there and answer other questions. Yeah.
It's just like so interesting to me, synchronicity, the way things happen. Because I, just before this podcast, I was working on some of our own AI tooling, and then reading reading through your bio quick to refresh, and that word philosophy actually popped into my head, because so basically one of the big projects that we're working on at CodeBuddy is a application launchpad, a starter repository that has all of the main pieces of an application, a SaaS application, what have you, and then an AI tool that is explicitly and specifically trained to build on top of that particular starter repository. And one of the things that's super important in order for that AI code generation partner tool to be like, skilled, intelligent, and correct at the kind of level that we expect at CodeBuddy, is you have to bring in uh, other things that have traditionally not at all been a part of quote unquote building software. Like, what is our AI's development philosophy? Right. And that's something that, like, you could talk about before and set core values for, like, here's our development philosophy as a software, uh, you know, generation agency or what have you, 5-10 years ago. But like, we're getting to the point now where, like, you can literally explicitly bring something like, our development philosophy is X, teach that to an AI, and kind of have that be a part of the equation. So I totally hear you on that idea of multidisciplinary or even transdisciplinary education, because I think those are the things that are, like, really allow us to unlock that level of AI, fidelity or what have you, that, like, we're not even used to thinking in these terms yet of of it.
I love the fact that you're talking about that in your company. I mean, that's just fabulous, because I mean, I think that, and if you ignore the big companies who obviously put in a lot of money on the issues of responsibility, even though they ignore many of the consequences many times. When Google just got fined in Europe, right? So, but I think that I mean, our idea is that all development in machine learning should be fairness informed. I guess if you want, that's kind of the phrase we are using in my group. But I mean, the point is very similar to when if you remember, we used to talk about cybersecurity, right, as an after the fact or a post hoc thing in software development and software engineering. Well, I mean, really, in the academic side, we always used to talk about, well, secure coding is coding from the beginning. I mean, you do security, you incorporate security into your code blocks, not after the fact, right? Hoping that, if you just hope that at the end it'll turn out to be a secure application, that's not going to work, right? And I think that mindset has helped us build better code in the modern day. But I think it's the same thing is true with AI or machine learning, because I think the mindset that there would be consequences even if our automation is 99% accurate and does everything uh, statistically correctly. I mean, it's still the problem is that are we informed in a way that our whole process of development is fair, right? Is going to result in equitable consequences. And I think that's a much bigger responsibility today because of the speed of automation you just described. I mean, I think if we ignore that completely, I think that makes us it may be laziness as human beings, but I think it makes us culpable in some ways of the potential consequences that may be good or bad. I mean, I'm not saying they're all going to be bad, but I think that's the issue. And who has? I mean, there's so many questions there, right? I was like, who is responsible if that does happen? And I think the AI Act in Europe has attempted to put some guardrails, but it's still hard. Like, who is responsible for the deep fakes on Twitter or misinformation on social media? I mean, who is responsible? I mean, is it you can't blame your agents to do that? If someone trained those agents and build them a way that they are producing that output, the question is the platform responsible? Is the developer responsible?
Yeah.
Is the consumer beware one notion, right? Or buyer beware?
Well, and who defines fairness too? Because you talk about truth, which is one thing, which is, yes, this either happened or not happened. That's very black and white. However, fairness in our society, when, everything is so divisive, one person is saying, that's right, and the other person is saying the opposite end of the spectrum is right. How do you define really, what is fair in the AI world?
Well, I mean, David. So yeah, I won't get into the politics of it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
conceptually speaking, I would say, I'm not talking about like the God big T truth, right? I mean, I'm talking about our human being level small T truth, all right? And I think we can be very logical about what fairness means, all right? It means that your outcomes are equitable to the population on which your model applies, right? I mean, this is not very difficult. I mean, let's start at the outcome side first. I mean, that's easy to understand. I mean, like, there are so many examples that people have heard about, like, the hiring chatbot that Amazon built based on the data that they had from their employees that rejected every female applicant for software engineer, right? Uh, so the fact is that there are unintended consequences of automation, especially in machine learning, where the model is learning and building on its own. So to me, fairness at the outcome level means, is it equitable? Does it not only equitable, but is it equitable in terms of the people it impacts, right? So if you think about just that portion of it, and I'm not even talking about the rest, uh, I really believe in this idea of distributive justice. I mean, this is what ethics theories are about. Like, at the end of the day, your AI or your machine learning model must be, at least conceptually speaking, apply equally to everyone, right? I mean, in terms, and that will actually depend on what you use to build the model, I mean, what you did to build the model. So I think that's what fairness means to me. It also means that if the model comes up with an output, I want to be able to transparently see, and this is the onus on you as a company, and Google and Microsoft and everyone, where I think the onus is on the people who build the model to explain how the outcome came to the consumer. So I want explainability to the extent that, if I am producing a result, you better provide me a machine explanation that is logical. All right. And then the third is, transparency. I want to know how you came up with that application and that explanation. What data did you use? Google doesn't tell you what it used in Gemini, or they don't tell you in Chat GPT, what was used. I mean, I asked Chat GPT, and it says that, I mean, if I am the free version, it's 2021. So it's
Yeah,
old
yeah.
data, right? So the fact is, and then it's also free data. It's not paid data, right? I mean, all the papers that Hunter, I mean, all that research that I do, Hunter was talking about, I have hundreds of papers I've written. Well, they're all behind a paywall. They're not going to be indexed by Chat GPT, right? Or even trained Chat GPT, right? So, so I think that's where, even though we don't like to talk about this, with the haves and have not question becomes more important, right? If I have the money to subscribe to ChatGPT's subscription version, I'm getting real time information. And, for example, in 2021, you may have denied COVID, right? And you may have put that out on social media, and then someone may have contended that there is evidence to show that COVID doesn't exist, to say that this is misinformation. Well, unfortunately, that portion of the information came in 2022. It's not in the training data set. So what do you think the machine learning model is going to say, or the LLM is going to say, right? So this is just a simplistic example, but my point is that explainability, equity at the outcome, transparency, and then equity comes from representativeness. In statistics, we always say this, right? I mean, your sample should not be biased, right? Why? Because we're saying, hey, you got to represent the population to which your machine learning model is going to affect.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like on that.
When
It's like on your math test where what's the answer, but then the most important thing is that next line that says "explain your work," and I've never asked ChatGPT that to explain the work, and will it actually go back and explain the work from the previous answer, or will it fire off a completely new response that is not related? Because responses in ChatGPT can be so random that one thing you get from one could be
no,
completely different to the other
so the
two.
good news is you can
Yeah.
prompt ChatGPT to actually explain. I mean, I have tried this where I can say, okay, can you cite references for
Yeah.
the logic you provide, for the
You provided.
whatever information you provided, and it does try to add references, but not all references may be true. So
Mm.
it becomes incumbent on you as the consumer to go and see if those references actually exist.
Buyer beware, yeah.
That's like that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, because and you said like these are the things that we don't like talking about, and like speak for yourself, because Devin can tell you I'm a chatterbox, and especially when it comes to theoretical things like about AI. But it does bring up an interesting point too, regarding like, okay, so fairness and truth and accuracy in the outcomes of AI and explainability, right? Uh, these are all things that like are incredibly important. I do feel like just because of the way, and it's interesting too, even just thinking back to saying AI is very fast moving, like it is, but at the same time, like the theory for the systems that we're currently experiencing has existed for a long time. So it's both very fast and very slow. Um, but basically, the world became aware of AI as a viable thing with the advent of ChatGPT 3.5, right? And that kind of set the anchor point for a lot of people in the general public, or honestly, just a lot of people who aren't AI researchers, right? So 99.999% of the population, ChatGPT 3.5 comes out, and all of a sudden, like, that's what everybody else anchors to as like, this is what AI is, right? Is this particular thing. And like so obviously there's a lot of buzz and conversation at that point about like truth and bias and training data sets and copyright laws and things like that. I do think that like it's worth taking a step back and kind of decomposing exactly what is AI, or really just having a nuanced conversation about the fact that there are a whole ton of different kind of expressions of these technologies, and the underlying like implementation very greatly affects like these conversations about truth, fairness, and whatever. So like great example that we talked about right at the beginning of this podcast, Perplexity AI. So they bill themselves as an answers engine, and essentially what they do, and like I'm sure there's a million other people that are like this too, but I always like to say like, "Oh, I built an early prototype of this 2 years ago," which I did. But like basically they use a large language model. They take in your question. So I typed in Deepak Khazanchi, right, to Perplexity. They use the large language model not to regurgitate a whole bunch of memorized information about you that was coded into the weights of neurons, but rather they use an AI to say, let's break this down. What is Hunter looking for? It seems like he's looking for a person. We should search LinkedIn. And then it goes out and does a real-time search of a whole bunch of different publicly available information, returns that result to me. And so essentially like the quote
You
unquote
paid for
input.
you paid for a user account, right?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And they
So
do have a
I
free
mean
version, but
that
it's the
won't work
same
that way.
endpoint. But yeah, basically the point being like the AI that's being injected in that process right there in Perplexity, and therefore like the fairness of the AI is limited to basically formulating the search terms and deciding which resources to go and get, and then summarizing the results and putting them together, which is a very different kind of equation, because now it's like, okay, the AI needs to be fair. So we need to make sure that we're checking all the different websites, right? We need to make sure that we're summarizing things in a way that's not biased. But it's no longer about like debiasing the base of information that it's summarizing for me.
Fascinating. I mean, I like your thought process. I think maybe yeah, stepping back may be good, right? I mean,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
let's say, from an AI perspective, first of all, I think the more popular thing that people are calling AI is really statistical machine learning, which is basically statistics on steroids in some ways, right? And this, as you said, existed, yeah, for many many years. It's just faster and computationally less intensive. Then you have generative AI, which is supposed to be self-learning, right? The model learns through neural networks, and deep learning and machine learning. All these are uh, connected. And then LLMs are really just a version of generative AI that actually focuses on language, right? So the reason I'm explaining this is because if you think of Perplexity as the way you described it, uh, what you are getting is the LLM portion of it, right? The interaction with the large language model portion. So what you're getting is it being able to understand natural language queries, and then looking at what if my information was in Chinese or in Mandarin or in other languages, right? I don't know if Perplexity does that. People are working to do that too, but the fact is that there's a team of people who is fine-tuning the parameters that Perplexity's LLM uses on a data set to come up with the outcome you see, right? So for me, the fairness question now is, did they tell you what data set they're using as a consumer, right? Maybe the website they extracted that information from is false, right? Maybe the people who were working on fine-tuning the LLMs for Perplexity have implicit bias. They don't like Indian Americans, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well,
Right?
they might. I mean, they liked you a whole lot, so like.
But the point, I mean, you get my point. My
Yeah,
point is
yeah, no,
that
for sure.
so fairness is unfairness is introduced when you have a development team like you guys. I mean, you have a development team which doesn't have many perspectives. So now you have people's implicit biases being coded into the optimization of the parameters or even the development of the algorithm itself. So this is what we call procedural fairness. So the process by which we come up with the model itself, whether it's fine tuning or actually building the model, that needs to be fair. And to make that happen, it's not only getting representative data, it's how you curate it. I mean, what did I do with that data once I got it? Did I ignore something? Did I leave something in there? Did I use that then to train my model or fine tune my parameters if it was an LLM? And then who was involved in doing that? Were there people challenging the logic? I mean, because I want people on my team who will challenge the logic of the model. I want human beings who would like what Hunter is doing with logically going through it. I want people like that to challenge. I want people who are doing kind of those AI QA, if you want to call it, but it's not really QA. To me, it's more like actually challenging the way we build our algorithms and build our models to make sure that all perspectives are included and that there is no implicit biases that we introduce in our logic. So that's, to me, it's not just unfairness is triggered by lack of representation of data. It is also because of how we curate it. What is the process we use? Maybe our assumptions were erroneous. All Indian Americans are professors. So, hey, it's an erroneous assumption, right? There are a lot of people who are developers, right? So the point is that you have this assumption that you come in as a human being. It's natural for us, right? But how do we make sure and advocate for in our governance of that process? And that's the governance side of this whole thing. And how do we assure at the end of the day that we are at least approximating fairness? Maybe not exactly there in the truth sense, but we are at least approximating it, right? And that'll be good enough. That'll be a good start.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point in there that you just made that like we all have biases and that's not bad. Or rather like that's not something that we should spend time trying to like remove entirely because it's going to be the way it is, but it's like how do we build a system that ensures that we get enough people with enough different biases to take a look at this thing. That's cool.
Just to kind of close that point is that the point you make is very important. Okay, so the fact is that we all come with implicit and explicit biases. I mean, because of the way we grew up, our culture, our background, our language, our the people we hang out with. There's lots of things that are maybe our political affiliation. All of those things introduce biases, right? The challenge to me, for me, with all the AI and machine learning hype, which worries me, is all the unintended consequences, right? The fact is, you may have intentionality, but there are unintended consequences. And that is the worry, right? Those erroneous assumptions may lead to unintended consequences that are not reversible, like the HR thing. Well, that's reversible. But what about if you were using it to diagnose a breast cancer on a medical image, right? and you gave the wrong outcome, even if it is a low probability outcome, right? So that is why I prefer human in the loop in all those kind of decisions. So that's kind of ties the whole thing up. Like you got the fairness informed development, but then I still need this expert who kind of looks at the outcome on a regular basis or uses it to support their decision making, but not to replace it. So I think that's how I think of it right now.
Were you
So
reading our
yeah,
marketing material before this? Because that's like
yeah.
that's basically spot on. What we're doing with human expertise and AI intelligence to help folks build code. Sorry, Devin, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, you come from a research university, and there's a lot of research going on, in Omaha too, as well, with the, med center and stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about, what some of these educational institutions are doing to kind of hone in on the research capabilities that AI can help, such as, research groups, creating their own AI models to, test, new cures, and then using the, scientific equipment they have in lab to actually verify, was that, a successful outcome, and then retraining the data. Are you seeing a lot of that? And are the institutions supporting, the research teams enough, to advance those, type of
Oh, there's
opportunities?
That's a wonderful question. I think I love it that you're asking me that. But I think that we don't have enough resources. I mean, the problem, I mean, and it's the obvious thing, right? I mean, you both know this, you're in the industry. I mean, the fact is that computational resources are expensive. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to run an LLM, I mean, it's not cheap to run this. And we do have shared resources in the University of Nebraska system, but they are in a queuing basis, right? I mean, it's not everyone's work is important. So the fact is that as a nation, I mean, some of the big universities, of course, buy the computational resources they need or build them. We need to, in Nebraska, for example, have better computational resources or maybe expand the resources we have. We do have access. I use some of our computational resources in the system. One of them is called the Holland Computing Center, which basically was supported through Dick Holland's donation. But it's been updated regularly, and we do have the ability to run LLMs, but it's slow because there's lots of other things going on there. And plus we are unpaid people, right? We don't pay for their services because we do research. So I think that the most important thing about doing generative AI kind of work and even machine learning work is that we need powerful computational resources. And this is true of you guys in the private sector. A small business like yours may not be able to afford uh, powerful LLM resources, right? Or powerful resources for running computational models that are large, right? I mean, small ones, sure, but not large. I mean, and so that's one aspect of it, this computational resources. The other is that, yeah, I mean, my research is in this idea of fairness. So, of course, I'm doing a lot of development work as well as evaluative work, right? Like, so for an example would be that I have a project along with some UNL engineering collaborators and some cybersecurity and computer science faculty in our college who are working on infrastructure health. So we are trying to figure out how we can use automation like machine learning and edge computing and sensing to do something different about how we assess our infrastructures, particularly bridges. Just in Nebraska alone, we have 16,000 bridges. I mean, think about that. I mean, these bridges probably are inspected once every 2 or 3 years. And they are old. They are, I think the mean age is 70, 75 years in the country. So, so infrastructure is a big deal in the United States. We have lots of bridges that are dated, and that's true of Nebraska. And now you got human inspectors who have to go there every 2 years to inspect it. So we need better ways of doing that. And so that's what our project is. So I have, for example, built a machine learning model that can detect cracks on concrete decks. So, I mean, or on pillars. So this is like you can run it on a phone and you can take a picture and see if that crack is interesting, right? From the reason for that is because we don't have enough inspectors. We need more people to be civil engineers. I mean, no, not many people are going into those disciplines that are STEM focused, as we all know. So that's so we are trying to build scalable models that are then, for example, with this crack model, I'll take that because that's what I have done, but our team is doing lots of different things. Uh, but in that model, we actually did a survey of the inspectors and told them, here's the ground truth, here's what our model is predicting. Do you think how close is our model's prediction to the ground truth? So this is what Hunter and you were talking about, the human part, the expertise part. I'm using a survey of the inspectors. Essentially, I got like 30 responses with the help of the Nebraska Department of Transportation. And they basically rated us on a 1 to 5 scale on how close are we to the ground truth, right? In our computational prediction versus our human expert. And we did good. So I mean, the interesting thing is that in the academic literature and the people who review our writing for these kind of products, they still are not there. So they're like, why are you using human experts? So it's funny that you get it, but my own peers are evaluating my research and saying, why are you doing that? So that's kind of interesting that even in academics, we're kind of slowly, leveling with that kind of idea. But it has to happen. I don't think that you can ignore the human expertise. And that also goes to the whole to how we train AI people, right? I mean, the fact is that people, I think my worry is that organizations are using machine learning services, cloud-based services, to do machine learning without understanding what's in the black box, right? And that's very worrisome to me intellectually, because that's why I'm talking about this fairness informed thing, because I'm like, just don't use it. Think about how it did what it's supposed to do, right?
That's a big thing of our current model that we're trying to figure out and that we came out with is not just providing the answer, but how do we take the user along the educational journey too as well,
Yeah.
side by side. So like you said, because if you don't understand what's happening in the black box, we're either just going to create a bunch of, ignorant people, or we're going to create a bunch of vulnerabilities in the system where it's, something went off slightly and you didn't have someone supervising it or knowing how to even supervise it. You're going to have problems.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right on there. The fact is that, when I talk about transparency of machine learning, it's really about not only about traceability, it's about what Hunter initially said, fidelity. Is the model producing results that have fidelity, or is it able to have transparency? Is it able to have traceability? Can I trace it back to the data? Uh, so that is just transparency. We came up with 16 dimensions of fairness. So, and that's just one of those.
Going back to the resource issue, I was talking to Deepak's like Code Crush, which is amazing. I was talking to these teachers and I was telling them all these like hacks on how to like, start businesses and like raise money and funding. And like I asked them their feedback at the end of the presentation, and they were like, "Well, our biggest concern was that you're talking about amounts in like the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like it's hard for us to ask for things that are like $100, $200. Now, granted, these are middle school, high school teachers and stuff, but too, taking it on, how are we going to get these people the resources that they need to be able to, educate and do these things that, for the next
Yeah.
generation?
No, absolutely. And that's also another thing that, my wife's just recently retired OPS, Omaha Public School teacher. So she tells me all those stories, right?
Yeah.
The fact is that I think she spent most of her salary in supplies for,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, but she was doing that. So she would buy stuff for the class and whatever. But my point is that, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Education is still very important, right? And we need to support our teachers, K through 12 and college. Professors are underpaid, generally speaking, even though we have high credentials. Same thing with teachers. I mean, they are going to educate the next generation of kids, your kids. I mean, we need to make sure that they are not only qualified but also well paid. I mean, I think they need to be able to survive and live a good life too. And I think if we don't take care of that, how are you going to have good education, right? And I think that's the big challenge as a society. I think. I mean, forget about automation. And those are social challenges we have.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, to even go down that rabbit hole of, and like I mentioned, like both my parents, public school teachers in Iowa, their entire careers. So, until college, I lived in a very much, education focused household. And, as I start kind of ideating with some of the possibilities with AI and how quickly we can build software, that's one of the first places that my mind goes is education, right? So like there's how do we educate people on AI, but then there's also a very fun conversation about how can we add to the educational experience of the average child in American public education using AI, right? And like even someone as young as, I've got a 3-year-old nephew, right? That running around, and he absolutely loves anything to do with cars or wheels or trucks or anything mechanical like that. And I was sitting, talking to my sister-in-law while he was running around about this very thing, like education and AI. And it's like Cam is his name, and if I'm trying to teach Cam something, and I can do it with some traditional example, whatever, or I could use a large language model to translate that in some way to involve trucks and cars and vehicles. It's like I mean, I haven't done the studies, right, but like I bet I know what they're going to say, right? And that's just like one small example of like just using somebody's interest to make something more relevant to them, right? That's just like literally scratching the surface.
Well, I love the example, and I'll tell you my, well, I guess I'll tell you my worry about that, right? I mean, I think I love the fact that you're thinking about how do we use AI to teach people better and more effectively. Clearly, the next generation is going to be, as we said, the younger generation today is digital natives. Maybe they'll be AI natives later on, but the fact is that they would grow up with AI around them, right? Automated cars, automated restaurants. I mean, the fact is that the nature of work is going to change, and also the nature of education has to change. But I still have this countervailing worry about the digital divide in the United States. And we are the richest nation in the world, right? We still have a digital divide. Okay. And the reason I mention that is because it just goes to your point about public school education and your parents being teachers. I mean, they'll get this.
Wait,
In
explain
COVID,
digital divide to me. I think I know what you're talking about, but want to make
yeah,
sure.
I'll give you an example. So, I mean, the best example is during COVID, right? Omaha Public Schools did not have Wi-Fi at home, right? I mean, they didn't
Yeah.
require every student to have a laptop. Right? Well, they didn't have the resources
Didn't
to
provide
have
that.
every
Yeah.
student do that. West Side, on the other hand, right in Omaha, every student already had a Mac, right, or a laptop. So COVID really didn't change anything. They just worked from home on the machine they had. Well, in April of that year, my wife was still teaching. I saw this firsthand happen in front of me. They suddenly have to switch off face to face, right? In March, we had COVID. You were all work out to work at home. You know what happened? Well, none of these parents had access to a machine. None of the kids had a machine. Many of the kids of the 55,000 children in Omaha Public Schools, a majority didn't have access to the internet at home. You know what? We had a wonderful superintendent at that time. She essentially wanted support from the state government. She didn't get it. So then she went to Apple and got 55,000 iPads ordered for every child, but it took 3 months. So for 3 months, my wife was sending emails to the parents, work email, so that they could get a lesson plan for that day or that week. Now that's in modern day United States. We are the wealthiest country in the world, right? So that's just, to me, terrifying, to say the least, right? I mean, we can't take care of our children's education. I mean, but that's an example. But for me, that is a digital divide. But there is also a digital divide that exists today. Even all the COVID thing maybe got resolved, but today, just between rural and urban, in rural schools, you don't have in broad school, but rural homes in Nebraska today, about 35% or so, I don't remember the exact stat, don't have broadband. Okay? Now, of course, there are initiatives from the state government underway to help with that, but look, just because we have AT&T and Wi-Fi on the internet in Omaha and Lincoln, and our kids can log on to Cox Internet or whatever, not true in rural. They have to put up a tower and put a dish and get that kind of internet. All right. And or they have dial-up. So think about this. I mean, there is an information divide because now you don't have access to high-speed internet. You don't have access to information and affordable internet. You don't want to buy a $70 a month internet, right? So now you got people in the rural communities and kids who don't have access to information that you do and knowledge that you do. I mean, and I also worry about things like, like in my, the kids in Millard and in Omaha and Lincoln and, these places. Well, I mean, these public school kids have access to Khan Academy. Both of you know probably what is Khan Academy. Sal Khan started this free resource, right, where you can learn about math and science, and these are used by schools to help teach. And now he has come up with, I don't want to market his product, but I really love what he's doing. He's talking about this thing called Khan Amigo, which is a chatbot, right? And I just saw a demo of it in January. Basically, the chatbot gives free tutoring to students anywhere in the world. So you basically can say, I'm working on this math problem, and it will not tell you the answer. It will say, hey, you're in the right direction. Maybe you need to adjust your thinking about X. So it actually responds in a very constructive tutoring type of way. I love the idea. Free tutoring from anyone. That's crazy. I mean, you can change the dynamics of how people learn math or science because now they have no need to pay a special tutor, right? I don't need a tutor to teach my high school kid how to do X or Y or my middle school kid. But the problem is, what about the digital divide? What about the people who can't get on there and get this chatting? So I'm trying to bring this full circle to the point that this is still a digital divide issue.
So it's interesting because it kind of leads to my last question, which I wanted to pose to you, and probably getting close to time here. But that's a great example of, because we've talked about a lot of stuff, one of which being unintended consequences. And I think that's one of the things, like whether it's due to like literature or just people being afraid of the bigger threats or whatever, that like whenever you talk about AI, it's like, oh, but what are the unintended consequences? Right. And the reality is, like, somewhat definitionally, they're not able to be known ahead of time. Right. But, let's just take the example of, us, right? Smaller company, up and coming company doing really big things with AI. We have a really strong mission to help people build software faster. We think that can help with economic mobility, economic development, so on and so forth. Like, we're working on these things. We have the right things in mind. But, unintended consequences are just that, unintended. Another, like an example with this Con Amigo, you could say like, well, oh, is that going to put teachers out of work then? Right? Is this thing gonna get to a place where whatever. And that's not my point. I guess what advice would you have for somebody in that sort of position where it's like someone like me, where it's like I'm not an AI ethicist. I am, you're fortunate enough to be able to work in this and spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm trying to run a business and do the right things and keep things, the business has to be economically viable, but it also has to be, responsible. And we have to make sure that we're doing the things that we can do to kind of suss out these unintended consequences and whatnot. So for someone like me in that position, what advice do you have as to like approaching that problem to say like, hey, I'm not an expert, but I do want to do like not only my part, but I want to be an active part in kind of making AI be a force for good within our country and our world. So like, how would you advise people like me to approach that?
Well, I love the fact that you put it that way, a force for good. I think that is important, right? I mean, I think first and foremost, we have to accept the fact that at the end of the day, all automation, whether it's AI driven or not, right, uh, will have certain risks, which is what we are calling unintended consequences. But our job as developers, engineers, managers, business owners is to make sure that we are putting due diligence, as accountants would like to say, in the processes we use, right? So I think having this conversation about procedural fairness and distributed fairness, I mean, these are not just artifacts, right? These are things you can actually execute in your internal processes. So that would be my advice. Think about how you build systems. Doesn't matter if they're automated AI-based systems or not. I think how we build systems, what processes we follow, are we making sure that there are no implicit biases? I mean, I can give you an example where I learned from a privacy engineer at Google that, they decided when they started worrying about privacy issues with Google searches, right? Their search engine. And she was telling me that actually she's a speaker at Code Crush, Devin. So she was actually one of the keynote speakers. I brought her from Google. And she was saying, look, I have opened a privacy engineering practice in Google, which is very smart for someone like Google because they're building all these AI-based products and also data-driven products where they are being accused of infringing individual privacy, right? I mean, they've been fined in Europe, right? So they're hiring lawyers, people with arts degrees into this privacy group to think differently about and challenge the algorithms that are being built. I think that's a smart move. So this my advice would be, yeah, you're gonna have someone in your group, or at least if you're a small group, in your team who's also thinking of those things.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. Are there any resources that you would recommend to kind of learn about these things, distributed fairness?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there are. I mean, of course, you can just Google the idea of fairness and distributed fairness, but I would recommend people reviewing the AI Act, which is in the EU. It has like a summary out there somewhere. I forget where, but I can find you the link. And reading about what guardrails the European Union has already put in place. And the reason for that is because it tells you the regulatory framework that some people have already thought through.
Mhm.
I mean,
And you
our
would say
country, yeah,
it's based. You've read it, and you would say that you kind of agree with
yeah,
the
yeah.
philosophies in there.
I think so, Hunter, because I think the problem is that we got to start somewhere. And the California state has tried to adopt part of it, the AI Act, but no other state has in the United States. And, the question is whether it's a state policy that needs to be done or at a federal level. I think it should be a federal policy. At least there should be some guardrails. I mean, like if you are Facebook and you're carrying misinformation on a sustained basis, isn't it your responsibility? I mean, to find a automated way of checking on that. I mean, they can, I'm sure. So, I mean, there are some basics like deep fakes. I mean, whose responsibility is that? I mean, I think we have a responsibility to our citizens, right? And I think also I would recommend reading and I know that people have different opinion about the United Nations, but United Nations has a thing called Digital Human Rights Framework, and DHR. I mean, you can Google this Digital Human Rights Framework, which actually establishes at least a consensus of all the 190 countries agreeing that there is a digital human rights. That we agree that all of us as individuals in the age of AI have human rights that go beyond the physical human rights, the right to education, right to, live in, right to food, and stuff like that. I will send you. I mean, I'm happy to share with you the digital human the digital human rights scorecard for Nebraska, for example, where all these parameters are, and it's for every state in the United States, right? And around the world, you can actually see the scorecard. So, this is like a sustainability index, it's called. But, what I'm saying is that there are resources like the United Nations Digital Human Rights Framework, things like that, that would be worth reviewing for people who are interested in the impact on society, because there are lots of people across cultures, across countries who are really thinking about these issues in a very big way. I mean, you may not think it's important today, but I think, it is important to all of us who are, going to see the impact of AI in the next 5 years to 10 years.
Yeah, which is
I also want to, I just want to say one thing about jobs. I mean, I think, Antur, you kind of referred to that. And I do think this is a fear that a lot of people have, like, oh, my job's going to go away, my work's going to be taken over by AI. And I would want to address that if you have a few minutes.
Absolutely.
I think I agree with, Huang, I mean, who's the CEO of NVIDIA. He's the one I heard talking recently. And he was talking about the fact that, you know what, truly speaking, AI is never going to replace the human being. He said this. He said, yeah, it might replace 20% of your work, 40% of your work, maybe even 80% of your work. But it's not going to completely replace you. The reason is that there are certain things only humans are good at, right? And it's hard to imagine a world, despite what Elon Musk might think, where everything will be done by AI. So if you are in a workplace where your work is routine, it is repetitive, it is highly possible that most of it will be taken away by AI, right? But what that means to you as a worker is that, well, then you need to maybe upskill, think about differently about what your work should be, right?
Go back to school.
Or just training.
Yeah, there's an aspect of that too that I was talking about the panel at UNO, which is that, like, generally speaking, because people like tend to put it that way, where it's like, oh, if your job can be replaced by AI, well, like, you probably suck already, basically, whatever. But like, the reality of it is that, like, rarely are jobs that nuanced where they're just a monkey button pusher. And pretty much everybody in those jobs, there's a reason that they're in that role. Like, there's something about jobs that they like. And most people don't like doing the repetitive things. So it's like, yeah, AI might start to replace parts of your job, but more than likely it's going to be parts of your job that you're already like, oh, I got to go and do that. Like, it's not the fun parts of your job.
And at drafting an email that is marketing oriented, man, you can ask ChatGPT, write the email, edit it, and send it, right? So, hey, I don't mind this kind of thing. I mean, I write stuff. I always get a second opinion from ChatGPT and say, hey, can you give me some adjustment to the grammar or to the writing or whatever? I mean, these are great tools. I mean, I don't think we should ignore those. Absolutely. And I think also we shouldn't be fear mongering. I mean, I think this is what I worry about, that people just kind of say stuff because they've heard something. And I think the workplace is going to be different. I mean, think about how we went from industrial revolution to the robotics factories to the information revolution with the internet. Now we're having the AI revolution. There will be a hype curve, it will mature, it will flatten. There will be work that will be replaced. You know, it happened in factories with robotics. But those same people are now running the robots, right? So, I mean, I think the fact is that there is always a portion of the job that needs to, as Antu said, has a human component. And I think in the high end kind of work, even in software coding, by the way, I would say what you're doing with your product, and I have heard Tech Mahindra and these companies have built Copilot versions for low level coding. So essentially, these tools that will do, hey, I just want to write this array and do this thing, and can you do that for me? Yeah, that's gone. It'll actually make your life easier, but you will be problem solving. You'll be trying to actually meet business requirements. so,
You
so I think
spend
that's a
a
good.
much
Yeah.
higher majority of your time solving real problems as opposed to
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
code, and it's a heck of a lot more fun, speaking from
It's
experience.
it's a lot more fun, yeah, and you'll be thinking about those unintended consequences.
Mhm.
Yep.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we'll put in the show notes the EU Act, AI Act, and then the UN Digital Human Rights. And I was just going to mention on that too, because like I noticed you kind of caveat it with like, oh, I know everybody doesn't like the UN, and like that's one of the things that I you know, we need to give ourselves permission to work on these things in progress and have them not be perfect, and not just shoot something down when we can find the first flaw in it. But I do think it's helpful, just again, like I said, for people like myself that we don't have the time to go and study a whole AI ethics book, but like just to have some quick hitters to be thinking about as you're going into your product development meeting where you're going to actually make real decisions that'll have impacts. So definitely
Yeah,
I'll go
and
check those out. And
I
yeah,
would say that we will have our framework published soon. So we will. I mean, we are happy to show you our characteristics of what we think of fairness. Yeah. So we have about 11 dimensions of fairness, I guess, if you
okay.
like to think of it.
So yeah, we'll stay tuned for that, and listeners be on the lookout as well.
Right.
But yeah, great conversation. It's good to finally connect with you. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Deepak.